Fiona asked me to lead the table, excuse me, that's entitled Navigating Challenging Workplaces. So with a title like that, it sounds like it's really negative before I even start, but hopefully it won't be. And the table is going to look at sort of three kind of key issues. And I may be preaching to the converted here, and everybody might know what I'm already talking about, but Fiona has asked me just to sort of explain the terms. So I'm going to be looking at issues to do with equity, inclusion, and horizontal segregation. But I'll throw in vertical segregation as an additional one to discuss. I'd like to pick up on a few things first of all. I think Mark said this morning that 72% of women now work. But I would question in what roles. So I don't want to be negative, but what sectors are they working in? Are they in sort of well-paid sectors? Where are they in the hierarchy? Are they at the bottom or are they near the top? So it's a question to think about. He also said today, women have choice. And yeah, they can become astronauts and so on and so forth. But again, I would question, do they? Because I think, academically gifted women and particular, talents like sportswomen and so on tend to, we see them in the headlines, we see their photos in the papers. But for, the average woman who perhaps isn't as academically gifted or hasn't got those sort of sporting talents or whatever it might be, what happens to them? Where do they go? Do they really have choice? And on our table, we were discussing that maybe, this idea that women work is because they actually don't have an economic choice. They have to work because today, we need two incomes to support mortgages and so on and so forth. So as I say, I don't want to be negative, but I just want to raise a few questions because I think that will actually help us focus on how we might challenge these things in the workplace. Fiona also asked me to look at, what is EDI? What is DEI? And are these terms the same? What does that, what do they actually mean? Well, EDI is, it used to mean equality, diversity, inclusion, but now we tend to have drifted across into this idea of equity rather than equality. Well, is there a difference? Well, the answer is yes, there is. Equality is sort of rather, I won't say it's outdated, but it's effectively been around a long time because we've got equalities legislation. In America, I think it started with the sort of Civil Rights Act 1965. In the UK, it was Sex Discrimination Act and the Race Relations Act 75 and 76, and all wrapped up now in the Equalities Act of 2010. But what this gives us is it gives us supposedly an equal opportunity. So it's about equal chance. But the thing with equal chance is that it's like the roll of a dice. So if you have an equal opportunity or an equal chance, you've got an equal chance of a 1 or a 6 coming up on the top. But the issue is the dice are actually loaded. And what this is the difference between equality and equity. Because equity is about fairness. You just look equity up in the dictionary, and that's basically what it means. It's about fairness and justice. But because the dice are actually loaded, it means that minorities are not starting on a level playing field. So they've got sort of issues that are problematic for them. And although equalities legislation looks at particular characteristics, which it calls protected characteristics, and we can't discriminate on people, on grounds of those protected characteristics, it doesn't actually take into account that people have these different starting points. So that's where equity comes in. So just to give an example, we heard this morning, and it's still the case today, that women tend to have fewer networks, they have fewer role models, they have fewer mentors, fewer sponsors, and so on. And when job opportunities come from who you know, then the more people you know and the better your networks, the more chance you've got of getting those job opportunities. So that means that, that playing field isn't really level to start with. So we have to think about what we can do then to give women equal access. So access is about getting in the door. And at this point, organisations start thinking about their policies and procedures. And I know that Mark made the point that, we want to kind of, if you like, not leave them behind, but think about how we should actually have a focus on values. But organisations operate on policies and procedures. We can't get away from it. They're there, and that's what we have to work with. So if we want to get more women into managerial roles, for example. One way we would be able to do that is to encourage them to apply for those managerial roles. Because if they don't have the networks and the mentors, the sponsors and so on, they might not even know that those roles are there. So this isn't positive discrimination, because that's illegal. It's positive action. And what it means is you just make women aware that these things are available and that, you encourage them to apply. So we've moved beyond the equal chance and we've gone into the idea of equal access. But equal access is not the same as equity because it doesn't necessarily give an equal share. And what women need today is an equal share of those managerial and leadership roles. So we see the photos of the women astronauts and we see the photos of these women who are, CEOs in FTSE 100 companies and so on. But on the whole, they are few and far between. So they don't have an equal share. Sorry to say this, women, we don't have it. So what can we do to get, a greater share of these roles for women? So, one way around that might be to say, well, okay, we need to give more sort of managerial or leadership training to women. And you might say, well, okay, but women have got to perform in the interviews. They have to have confidence. So it's all very well having the equal access. You get them in the door, you give them the opportunity for the interview, but they still have to perform well in that interview. And they might need additional support in order to do so. So it does raise some questions. I'm going to just throw them open for you to think about, really, is, what else can we do to improve true equity in the workplace? The second area that Fiona asked me to talk about was diversity, and that's about celebrating difference. And, are we talking about EDI or are we talking about DEI, and what's the difference? And generally speaking, they're one and the same thing, although if you've got a DEI focus, you're focusing on diversity because it's first. And if you've got an EDI, you're focusing on equity first. And diversity is generally thought to be a good thing. We heard about the business case this morning. Generally speaking, businesses that have a diverse workforce perform well. But it's important to remember that diversity, if you just focus on diversity, and I think Mark sort of mentioned this morning, you just got a numbers game, really, because if you're going for quotas, it's not necessarily that you've got the best people. So diversity statistics are important. Everybody wants to have a diverse workforce. But if you're just focusing on those statistics and you're not focusing on inclusion, then that diversity becomes a little meaningless, really. I don't really know why President Trump is saying that diversity is such a bad thing. I'm not sure anybody quite knows what President Trump means. But there is a possibility, she says, just giving the benefit of the doubt, that maybe if you just focus on statistics and you focus on having a diversity profile, but you don't actually focus on inclusion, you don't focus on listening to people, you don't focus on taking on board people's ideas, then maybe you don't necessarily get the best workforce. I did note that Mark made the point about the nuclear industry and about diversity. One of the rationales for diversity was about addressing issues of risk. So I just thought that was quite interesting, given that air traffic control is quite a risky job, I would have thought. And that was the first point that Trump made when those aircraft crashed very early on, I think, in his presidency. He blamed it all on diversity. To be honest, you could have scraped my jaw off the floor, I think, when he said that, but there you are. Maybe I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. So I think that with diversity, you've got to actually think about inclusion. And that's where it gets difficult, really difficult, because it's about hearing people's voices. It's about listening to them, and it's about taking on board what they have to say. And the thing is we're all different. Everybody's different. And if you've got a different background, a different profile, different areas of, in quotes, privilege or disadvantage, one or the other, or a mix of the both, in essence, your views are going to be different. And it means you have to listen and you have to recognise what people are saying. So it's messy, it leads to conflict, it's time consuming. But if at the end of it you take on board those voices, then you have inclusion and you have engagement, you're more likely to have a more sort of productive outcome. But it's not easy. And, we talk glibly about diversity and inclusion, but it's not the easiest thing to do. So I guess the question that comes from that is, what can we do? What can we do to actually ensure that we do listen to those voices and that we act on them? Because if we want to embrace inclusion, that's what we have to do. And then the final thing to talk about was about horizontal segregation. And today, women, there might be 72% of them in work, but they do tend to be concentrated in particular sectors. And this has remained the same for many, many years. So some work that was done by the Women and Work Commission quite some while ago, they found that girls and young women do tend to be channeled into what they call the 5 Cs. And I can never remember them, so I have to read them. Catering, cleaning, caring, cashiering, and clerical. And if you take a look at some workplaces, I don't know, just walk into your local branch of your bank, who's sitting on that counter that are facing the public? It's quite often women. In the supermarket, who's on the tills? Women. So you start seeing that, those sort of cashiering jobs are female. Mark said this morning, and again, I'm just looking at the statistic, I think he said 9% of nurses are male. Well, that must mean that 91% of nurses are female. So again, it's caring. I was reading in the paper the other day that 50% of doctors are now women. So, there's some progress there. But then start looking at the horizontal segregation. They're GPs. They're not necessarily surgeons. They're doing particular roles. And often that's because those particular roles they do balance out with their family lives. You can actually manage a family life with being a GP, but it's less easy to do so if you're in an emergency department in a hospital. Those 5 Cs tend to be lower paid, and that's the real problem. When occupations feminise, pay falls, and that horizontal segregation is a real driver of the gender pay gap. So unless we can get young girls and young women to start thinking about masculine careers, which pay more money, they are always going to be in those lower paid professions. The other issue is that research has shown that horizontal segregation, basically reinforces vertical segregation. And vertical segregation, you will have heard of the glass ceiling, this invisible barrier, and women can't break through. So if the women are always in particular occupations that are feminized and that don't pay particularly well, on the whole, they don't get up the ladder to reach the very top. And it just reinforces, again, the gender pay gap. The final thing is just to comment on global mobility. And the statistics are still showing that women hold around 1/3 of international positions. So, it's gone up over the years from a very low percentage, but it seems to have levelled out at 1/3. So you might argue, well, why isn't it 50%? And maybe 1/3 is okay. Depends on your viewpoint. But if you look at where they are in those positions, they tend to be the more junior international roles. So the senior international roles tend to be male-dominated. So you find that international mobility is both horizontally and vertically segregated. Why does that matter? Well, people who reach the top of companies, the people who do hold the best, well, not necessarily the best paid, but, the sort of more prestigious roles, they tend to have had an international career. And if women don't get in and break through what's called the glass border to get that sort of geographical mobility, if they don't get that on the whole, then they haven't got that background that's necessary to move up to the more senior leadership positions in organisations. So again, it leads to another question for you to think about. What can we do to reduce those 5 Cs? So for, young girls and young women to go into professions that aren't considered to be the feminine and the badly paid professions. And then also what can we do in terms of global mobility to encourage more women to take international careers and also to ensure that they get higher roles within them as well, not just the more junior roles. So that's the sort of the workplace challenges. Very briefly, I was told to keep to 10 minutes. I don't know whether I've done that or not, but I've tried. So.